What's up, everybody? Matthew here. Thanks for checking into the channel. I got a viewer criticism the other day that I wanted to respond to. I almost never take the time to respond to all the criticisms that I get. I do thank you for all the feedback. I love getting emails from you all and hearing questions and sometimes compliments, sometimes criticisms or critiques. It's all welcome. Glad to have all the feedback on this channel. But recently I've been talking a little bit about Pentecostalism, kind of sparked by the whole cessationist documentary, which recently came out. And I did a little follow-up video, you might have seen it, in which I gave 5 questions for my Pentecostal friends to think about as it relates to continuationism on one hand and cessationism on the other hand. And as I was just kind of flipping through the comments a little bit, one of the readers suggested that the reason I think the way I think on this particular topic is because I only read within my own tradition. And that kind of struck a chord with me and made me think to myself, I wonder if that's true. You know, I do think that it's very important that we guard ourselves against what is called confirmation bias, a topic I've spoken out about recently on another video as well. Confirmation bias being the idea that you kind of always interpret everything around you in a way that confirms your existing worldview and affirms the beliefs that you already have. Now, all of us do this. Christians do this. Atheists do this. Lutherans and Charismatics and Pentecostals and Presbyterians, we all have to kind of watch out for this. And that's also true when it comes to taking in the things that we take in when we read. We tend to, even when we're reading somebody that we disagree with, we tend to read that with a little bit more critical eye than the way that we read the people that we happen to agree with largely. And the other way that that can work sometimes is that we only selectively read the kinds of materials that we know for a fact are probably going to confirm our existing beliefs and doctrines and dogmas. So I thought about that question a little bit. It didn't insult me. In fact, I appreciated the comment because maybe it's true. So I started to think about my life and especially my reading habits, wondering to myself, is it true that I really only read the things that I already believe? And maybe that is one of the reasons that I am short-sighted on some of these things. I know for a fact that there's a ton of things, a ton of materials that I have not read and ideas that I haven't sifted through, major authors that I haven't really reckoned with, epochs of history that I'm unfamiliar with. And I think that's just part of human ignorance. We're always going to have a massive ignorance deficit to try to overcome by any kinds of learning methodologies. But I did want to press back just a little bit about my ignorance in certain categories. So I thought to myself, okay, well, first of all, let's consider my formal education. Now, I hope this doesn't bother anybody for me to recite my educational regime that I've been through a little bit, or regimen, I should say. But when I went to undergraduate at Malone College, understand that that's not a Reformed institution, though it is a Christian school. Malone University, where I took my first degree, bachelor's degree in Bible and theology, is a school that is affiliated with the Friends denomination. Now, you probably haven't heard of the Friends, but they're modern day evangelical versions of the Quakers from history. And so trust me when I tell you this, that we were assigned a lot of like Anabaptist or Baptistic or Charismatic or Pietistic writers, in addition to some of the Reformed people that we were required to read. Now, it just so happens that I had one of my theological professors was a Lutheran, another was a Methodist, and a third was a Reformed guy. And it was the assignments of the Reformed professor that most struck a chord with my heart, obviously. And when I did have the opportunity to read through materials that I could select on my own, I did tend to select those things which I most greatly appreciated, which happened to be the Reformed writers. But I'm thankful for having gone through Malone University because it did give me a diversity of authors. Again, a lot of Pietists, a lot of Anabaptists, a lot of Baptist, a lot of Wesleyan writers, assignments, and things like that. So I don't consider myself completely uneducated when it comes to reading outside my tradition, at least so far. Now, when I went on for my seminary degree, I went to Ashland Theological Seminary, which is a Brethren-related school. There's Ashland Brethren, there's Grace Brethren, there's other kinds of Brethren. But once again, most of my professors there were of an Anabaptist Brethren background. And so quite a bit of the reading that we did there was, again, kind of that pietistic roots. Some revivalist roots for sure. And again, I had a couple of Reformed professors, and once again, I tried to steer towards Calvin, thinking about his thought and a lot of projects that I had to do. But having taken 2 degrees from non-Reformed seminaries or universities, I do consider myself having read outside the tradition a little bit. Now, my doctoral degree at RTS Orlando, of course, that's a wholly, completely Reformed institution. And my dissertation being on Jonathan Edwards, I did steer a lot of my reading in the way of Edwards and John Frame and others as well. Of course, R.C. Sproul taught at that institution. So I do have just a ton of Reformed reading in my background. And if I'm completely honest, probably most of the reading that I do today is that which I really enjoy. And I tend to enjoy those writers that are Reformed. Now, I began to think to myself, okay, well, what am I still reading? Am I just have I completely dove into the Reformed deep end of the pool, or are there other people, other voices, other traditions that I still continue to read? Well, as you know, I mentioned earlier that I'm working on a list of 100 books that I think I'd really like to devote my mind to for the rest of my life, knowing that life is short and we can only read so much. And I haven't quite decided whether or not I'm going to lock in to those 100 books really rigidly. But I do think the idea of having 100 influential books that I really know very well does have some merit. So I've been drafting that list of 100 books. I've got about 98 on the list. I just took 2 of them off last night. And I'm working on 2 versions of the same list. One is going to be alphabetical and the other is going to be ranked, actually from 100 to number 1 on my list. I'm pretty sure about my top 10 already, probably my top 20. Gets a little loose in the middle. But I was looking at that list last night, again, asking myself that question, do I fail to read outside of my own tradition? And on this list, I can tell you that 35 of the 100 books or 98 books that I have right now are definitely outside of the Reformed tradition. Okay, so just thinking about a few of the books that are on that list and what is my tradition. So I'm going to define my own tradition as that tradition that is Reformed generally, and specifically Presbyterian. Now, there is a whole lot of books that are kind of marginal when it comes to that. So because I'm specifically a Presbyterian, I had to kind of wrestle with, should a writer like John Bunyan be included in my tradition or outside my tradition? Of course, he is a Reformed Baptist, so he's kind of half in and half out, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, right? So when I say that 35% of my top 100 books are outside my tradition, that does not even include writers like John Bunyan or even John Piper, okay? So that list of 35 does not include even John Piper, who would differ from me in quite a few areas. For instance, he is Baptistic, congregational in form, and open to the charismata, whereas I am Presbyterian, Reformed Presbyterian in ecclesiology, and cessationist in my views. So that doesn't even include John Piper or Bunyan or other, even Spurgeon as well, and other Reformed Baptists. So when I say that 35% of my books are outside my lane, I'm thinking of those writers that are clearly outside of my lane. So I have a little bit of Luther. I've got some Bonhoeffer on that list. Okay, so from the Lutheran camp, I have Anglicans. I've got C.S. Lewis. I've got J.C. Ryle. I've got Roman Catholics like Tolkien on that list. I have more Brethren or Anabaptists on that list, like Elizabeth Elliot, for instance, Jim Elliot. So the list does have quite a bit of variance. Now, whether or not 35% is the right number, I don't know. And I would actually like for you to tell me, what do you think? How much should one read inside his or her tradition? Is 50% the right number, or should you mostly narrow down on what you actually believe in reading in those areas? Well, for me, I think 35% outside the zone, okay, and actually a little bit more than that if you did include those marginals, that's a pretty good balance in my view. So it's not that I'm completely ignorant with anything outside of the Reformed and Presbyterian tradition, though I do admit that a lot of what I read is Reformed stuff. And I'll give you a couple reasons why I would defend that principle on its face. Number one, I tend to like to read those things that I believe are true. I believe that the Reformed and Presbyterian tradition of Christianity is true. I think it's truest. It's the most true. If there was a different tradition, that I thought was more true than the tradition that I'm in, believe me when I tell you, I would leap over and join that tradition. In other words, if I thought that the Episcopal Church or the Anglican Church or the Church of Christ or the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod was more faithful than Reformed Presbyterianism, then I would join that tradition. And so I defend my reading list on the principle that I want to read that which is most true. Second, I want to read that which is the most helpful. And inasmuch as I am a Reformed pastor, I'm a pastor at a Presbyterian church, I want to make the most practical use of my time by reading the kinds of sources that are actually going to have the most payoff in terms of the dividends for my practical ministry. So every week I'm putting together sermons, I'm putting together Bible studies, I'm putting together lectures. Just this week, by way of example, this is just an example of my week. I'll be teaching doctrine on Wednesday nights, okay? I have men's Bible study on Friday morning. We're working through the book of Acts. We have leadership course on Saturday morning, so I'm putting together a lecture on how to put together a message. Of course, I have my regular Sunday sermon. I've got marriage counseling coming up this weekend as well. All of those things require diligent effort and preparation on my part. And because it requires that diligent effort and preparation, I want to be reading those sources which are most likely going to help me put together the materials that I need to edify my church. So I would defend reading within my tradition on that principle as well. And then third, and perhaps this is just as important as anything else, I actually like the things that I read. For me, reading is a joy. And when I find myself kind of combating the author, there is a sense in which that is very, very helpful to do. But I do have to admit that I don't enjoy it as much, because when I'm reading somebody like Thomas Watson, my soul is actually lifted up and buoyed by the things that he says. I find my soul uplifted when I read Thomas Watson, so I enjoy it on a very, very practical level. And so reading the kinds of persons that are in my tradition, I actually like much more than if I was going to have to kind of struggle through somebody who's very much outside my lane, whose viewpoint I largely disconsider. Okay. And then finally this, and this would be my last point, and then I'll sign off for the day. Life is very, very, very short. I think about this all the time, especially as my kids are growing up, as my years in the ministry are stacking up, tally marks going on. Married for 23 years, realizing that at age 46, 47, I'm closer to death than I am birth. I'm closer to the grave than I am the cradle. Life is really, really short, and I want to invest my mind, my heart, my whole being in the kinds of things that I think are really going to serve to the ends of Christ's kingdom. And again, in my view, you can totally disagree with me, and please feel free to do so. That kingdom is expressed wonderfully and beautifully, though not exhaustively. You know, other denominations have some wonderful things that are beautiful as well. But I think what Christ has done in his kingdom, in Reformed doctrine, in Presbyterian ecclesiology, is very beautiful. And because life is brief, I want to camp out there. If that bothers you, cool. That's great, because you're free to disagree with me, and I do welcome that as well. So thanks for that viewer comment or criticism. I appreciate that. These are the kinds of things that challenge us and sharpen us to be better and improve. Thanks for checking in. Love you lots. Talk to you later.